Picture it. Louisiana, 1854. The air thick with the scent of jasmine and sugar, humid and heavy, just like the unspoken rules of society. On a steam-whitened veranda, overlooking miles of cane fields shimmering under the relentless sun, a scene unfolds outside New Orleans. Here, Jean-Pierre Labarre, the richest planter in St. James Parish, slams his brandy glass down on a polished walnut rail. The clatter rings out, a punctuation mark to his boast. He could do anything he wanted with his own property. Anything. Even marry her. The men around him, fellow titans of the sugar kingdom, chuckled, but there was a glint in Labarre's eye that dared them to challenge him. And challenge they did. A bet was made on the spot, the stakes impossibly high. Marry the enslaved cook by Sunday, or forfeit $10,000 in gold. Can you imagine the audacity? He swaggered inside the big house, his confidence fueled by liquor and unchecked power, and issued the command to the young woman. Dress in your mistress's cast-off lace. By dawn, a drunken notary, roused from a brothel, mumbled through a ceremony. It was a grotesque parody of matrimony, a mockery of sacred vows. But by the end of that cane-cutting season, the groom's empire lay in ashes, his blood staining the levee, and the bride, still legally a slave, mind you, held the keys to everything he had ever owned. This isn't just a story. It's a searing testament to how one reckless wager, born of hubris and a twisted sense of dominion, detonated the rigid, brutal world of sugar and slavery. And trust me, the South tried desperately to erase every single trace of what happened next. Want to see the receipt for this explosive moment? Picture the marriage certificate itself, ink now foxed and brown with age, tucked away, almost accidentally, in a mildewed St. James Parish ledger. It's a stark, simple document, listing the names of the bride and groom, the date, a witness. But then, in the margin, scrawled in the clerk's hurried, almost defiant hand, is one damning word: contraband. Because in 1854, Louisiana, the law was brutally clear. A master could sell, whip, or work his slave to death without much consequence. But he absolutely, unequivocally, could not lawfully wed her. Yet Jean-Pierre Labarre did exactly that. The moment that crude loop of sugar house twine, a stand-in for a ring, touched Delphine's finger, the entire carefully constructed social order of the river parishes began to unravel. It was an act that defied law, challenged custom, and shattered the very foundation of their society. Let's set the scene, shall we? Louisiana, 1854. The Mississippi River, a fat, green snake, bends majestically south of Baton Rouge, its waters carrying the lifeblood of the South. Steamboats, churning and hissing, would unload their precious cargo onto the levees: silver, silk, and, most tragically, human beings. These levees, mind you, were built by the very same hands that would then be sold upon them. This was a land defined by its extremes: breathtaking natural beauty, immense wealth, and the unspeakable cruelty of chattel slavery. It was a region where sugar was king, and the fortunes of men like Jean-Pierre Labarre were built on the backs of enslaved labor. Labarre was, by all accounts, a colossus in this landscape. He owned 12 miles of that vital riverfront, an expanse that would be considered a small principality today. His workforce numbered 1,200 enslaved individuals, each a unit of labor, a piece of property in his vast empire. And he possessed the only sugar mill in the parish capable of double-grinding cane, a technological marvel that gave him a distinct, brutal advantage in the fiercely competitive sugar market. His immense fortune didn't spring from ingenious investments or innovative business practices. It rested on a chillingly simple, yet devastatingly effective equation: human bodies plus fertile soil equals limitless, brutal profit. This wasn't just about agriculture. It was an industrial-scale operation run with ruthless efficiency, where human lives were merely cogs in a machine designed to produce wealth. And then there was Delphine, the woman whose culinary talents kept the big house humming, her reputation for exquisite cooking stretching from the opulent dining rooms of New Orleans all the way up to the bustling port of St. Louis. She had been born on this very place 26 years earlier, her earliest memories likely tied to the sounds and smells of the plantation. Her mother, sold away when Delphine was just 8 years old, left her with only two things: a tiny, well-worn iron pot, and a whispered rumor that her father was the master's own brother-in-law. This was the grim reality for many enslaved people, their families torn apart, their lineage often a complicated, painful secret tied to their oppressors. By 15, Delphine wasn't just a cook. She was an artist, a master of her craft. She could scale a 100-pound kettle of gumbo down the steps of a moving steamer, its decks swaying with the river's rhythm, without spilling a single drop. By 20, her intellect was as sharp as her knives. She could read a recipe with the same lightning speed and discerning eye with which she could read a face, understanding its unspoken truths. The other enslaved people, recognizing her quiet power and skill, called her the queen who stirs. But every single night, after feeding the masters and their guests, she was locked into the windowless cookhouse behind the kitchen, a stark, brutal reminder that even extraordinary talent, even undeniable dignity, was still considered mere property in this world. Labar himself was 38, a man who had already buried one wife and remained childless. He was, above all, famously bored. And in that boredom, he found his narcotic, gambling. For men like him, with absolute power and seemingly endless resources, the thrill of risk was the only thing that could cut through the suffocating ennui of their lives. He once bet a rival planter that he could race 2 of his strongest field hands down the levee at midnight, the loser facing the horrific punishment of a public flogging. Labar won that bet, and in a chilling display of his callous nature, he collected the whip himself, personally administering the brutal beating. This wasn't just about winning money. It was about asserting dominance, proving his absolute, unquestionable power over every living thing on his land. So, when Augustin Dusson, a neighboring planter, a man whose own wealth bordered on Labar's, sneered that even Jean-Pierre's power had its limits, the wager was, in hindsight, utterly inevitable. 10,000 in gold, a fortune that could buy a small town, was laid on the table. Dusson bet that Labar couldn't parade his own slave through the parish church as a bride. Labar's colossal pride, his ingrained belief in his own omnipotence, outweighed the law, outweighed common sense, outweighed even the last remnants of brandy settling in his glass. He would prove them all wrong. He always did. The air on Saturday night, the eve of this grotesque bet, hung heavy with a thick, almost palpable fog rolling off the river. It clung to everything, muffling sounds, distorting shapes, making lanterns look like fireflies caught in a gauzy, spectral net. Inside the grand, imposing big house, a different kind of fog settled over Delphine. She stood on a worn carpetbag, a symbol of her transient, uncertain status, while 2 housemates, their faces tight with a mixture of fear and forced deference, laced her into a gown. It was a dress once worn by Labar's dead wife, a silk garment the color of old magnolias, now imbued with a macabre irony. The waist, designed for a different body, cinched too tight, while the bosom, too loose, hinted at a life Delphine had never known, a role she was being forced to play. "Smile," the overseer's wife hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You're about to make history." But Delphine's face remained flat, unyielding as a cast-iron skillet, betraying nothing of the maelstrom surely raging within her. She was a canvas upon which their twisted drama was being painted, but she refused to be a willing participant. At dawn, the small bazaar party set out. They rode through the mist-shrouded cane fields towards a decaying chapel, its weather-beaten timbers a testament to forgotten prayers and fading faith. Labar, in a perverse echo of solemnity, wore his finest Confederate gray wedding coat, a stark, almost prophetic choice of color. Delphine rode pillion behind him, her bare feet, calloused from years of labor, brushing lightly against the mule's flanks. The notary, a man of questionable repute, had been roused from a brothel at knife point, his bleary eyes and slurred speech adding another layer of sordidness to the proceedings. He read the rites so fast, the Latin blurring into an unintelligible murmur, as if even the ancient words of the church recoiled from this sacrilege. There were no banns, no formal proclamations, no gleaming ring. Instead, a crude loop of sugar-house twine, rough and biting, was forced onto Delphine's finger. 2 field drivers, coerced into attendance, stood as witnesses, signing their X's, their presence a stark reminder of the true nature of this union. When the notary, with a final drunken flourish, pronounced them man and wife, Labar kissed her hard, a possessive, triumphant gesture, as if tasting victory. Delphine's eyes, however, stayed open, fixed on the crucifix above the altar, on the carved Christ, also nailed to wood he did not choose. It was a silent, searing indictment of her own crucifixion. Legally speaking, the entire ceremony was a sham, utterly void. The law in Louisiana, specifically Article 8 of its civil code, stated unequivocally that a slave cannot contract matrimony. This wasn't some obscure loophole, it was foundational. Enslaved people were considered property, not persons, and thus lacked the legal capacity to enter into contracts, including the sacred contract of marriage. Yet, La Barre, in a final act of defiant exhibitionism, ordered the chapel doors flung wide. He wanted the nearby workers, the field hands, the house servants to see. This wasn't about love or even legal recognition. Spectacle was the entire point. He strode back down the aisle, brandishing the ink-wet certificate like a captured flag, a trophy of his dominance. Within hours, the scandalous story, fueled by whispers and outrage, flew along the river road, faster than any steamboat. It was a story that could not, be contained. The news hit white society like a cannonball, sending tremors through every stately mansion and opulent parlor along the river. They didn't just disapprove, they convulsed with outrage. The rector of St. James Parish, a man accustomed to the quiet dignity of his pulpit, penned a furious letter to the bishop, decrying the profanation of the sacrament. How dare this planter, this debauched aristocrat, drag the holy institution of marriage through such mud? Planters' wives, their delicate teacups rattling in their hands, whispered venomously over floral arrangements, accusing La Barre of having gone abolitionist, the absolute worst slur imaginable in their world. It was an accusation that struck at the very heart of their social and economic fabric, implying that he was undermining the institution upon which their entire way of life was built. The repercussions weren't just social, they were economic. 3 major cane buyers from New Orleans, powerful men who controlled vast markets, promptly canceled their contracts, fearing that even a single grain of sugar from La Barre's tainted plantation would carry a moral stain, a mark of his scandalous transgression. Their outrage wasn't for Delphine, or for the sanctity of marriage. It was for the disruption of their carefully constructed racial and social order, the perceived threat to their property and profits. Inside the slave quarters, however, the reaction was far more complicated, a swirling mix of fear, resentment, and a dangerous, fragile hope. The older women, the matriarchs who had seen generations come and go, feared that the master's outrageous stunt would only bring down harsher patrols, leading to more brutal beatings and the suppression of their precious, clandestine nightly dances. They knew that any perceived upheaval, any challenge to the master's authority, often resulted in increased repression for all. The men who had secretly courted Delphine, who harbored their own quiet affections for her, felt a blade twist of jealousy, a painful reminder of their powerlessness in a system that denied them even the right to choose a partner. Yet, amidst the fear and resentment, a few dared to hope. If a wedding, however false, however legally void, could happen, if the master himself could so flagrantly defy the unwritten rules, what else might bend? What other impossibilities might suddenly become, however fleetingly possible? It was a seed of rebellion, planted in the most unlikely of soils. By Monday, the parish judge, a frail, elderly man who had never dared to free a single soul in his decades on the bench, found a sealed complaint awaiting him. It was signed by an astonishing 23 planters, a unified front of white society against La Barre. The charge was damning, designed to strike at the core of their perceived societal values. Unlawful cohabitation tending to subvert racial order. This wasn't just about a man and a woman. It was about the fundamental structure of their world. The penalty for such a transgression could be prison, a humiliating fate for a man of La Barre's standing. But planters, with their wealth and influence, seldom faced juries of their peers. The system was designed to protect them. Still, the complaint mattered. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a declaration. It meant the neighbors, his supposed equals, had chosen sides, and Jean-Pierre La Barre, the man who once believed he ruled everything, now stood utterly alone on the very levee he used to command. La Barre's first error, the one that set this whole catastrophic chain of events in motion, was monumental pride. His second and arguably more fatal error was a simple yet profoundly consequential act of paperwork. In his arrogance, in his desperate need to prove his absolute ownership over Delphine and to rub his victory in the faces of his peers, he committed a legal blunder of epic proportions. He instructed the parish clerk to file the marriage certificate, right there alongside the deeds to his mules and his acreage. Inadvertently, he created a public, undeniable record that Delphine was both his wife and his chattel. Think about that paradox. A woman legally documented as both a human being with marital rights and a piece of property. This wasn't just a contradiction. It was a legal lightning rod, an impossible entanglement that would attract trouble from every direction. Because you see, the law in Louisiana, with its unique blend of French, Spanish, and American influences, was a labyrinth of complexities. While the Code Noir, originally implemented in 1724, had some provisions for enslaved people, including the right to marry with their master's consent, these protections had largely eroded by 1854. By the mid-19th century, interracial marriage was explicitly forbidden, and the legal capacity of enslaved people to contract marriage was denied. A slave simply couldn't be a wife in the eyes of the law. But Labarre's document, filed in a public record, suggested otherwise. Enter Céleste Dusson, sister of the rival planter Augustin, the very man Labarre had so casually provoked. Céleste was no shrinking violet. She was a notoriously sharp-tongued heiress, a woman of means and influence who understood the intricate dance of Louisiana society. Her motivations were likely a potent cocktail of family honor, social propriety, and perhaps a genuine, if paternalistic, desire to restore order. She wasn't just angry. She was strategic. Céleste hired a free man of color, a lawyer named Baptiste Rousseau, a bold and dangerous move in itself. Free people of color in Louisiana, particularly in New Orleans, formed a distinct and often educated class, navigating a precarious existence between white society and the enslaved population. They had some legal rights, though these were constantly being eroded, and their ability to practice law was exceptionally rare in the South. Rousseau, therefore, was a man of immense courage and legal acumen. Baptiste Rousseau filed a groundbreaking suit. His argument was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. Labarre's dual relationship nullified his title to Delphine. How could she be both property and wife? If she was a wife, she could not, by definition, be property, as wives held certain legal rights, including property rights, under Louisiana's civil law, which afforded women more legal standing than common law traditions. If she was property, then the marriage was a criminal sham, a violation of the very laws Labarre claimed to uphold. The suit wasn't asking for Delphine's freedom outright. Not yet. It asked the court to seize Delphine as a ward of the estate until her true status could be definitively settled. It was a legal maneuver designed to tie Labarre's hands, to force the courts to confront the inherent contradiction he had so carelessly created. The judge, caught in an impossible bind, found himself cornered. His entire career had been built on upholding the institution of slavery, on countless rulings that reinforced the status of enslaved people as property. To rule in favor of Delphine would be to undermine the very foundation of his legal world. To rule against her, given the publicly filed marriage certificate, would be to acknowledge Labarre's blatant disregard for the law and social order. So, he did what many in power do when faced with an intractable problem. He postponed. But postponement wasn't a solution, it was merely a delay. And delay, in this volatile world, meant that Delphine's fate dangled precariously through the harvest season, the very time when money and blood flowed fastest on the sugar plantations. October arrived, bringing with it the relentless, back-breaking grind of the sugar harvest season. The air buzzed with a different kind of energy now, thick with the hiss of boilers, the rhythmic flash of cane knives, and the cloying, sweet smell of molasses mixing with human sweat. This was the most critical, most brutal time of the year on a sugar plantation, when every hand was needed, every minute counted, before the first frost could destroy the entire crop. But underneath the frantic activity, a dangerous tension smoldered. Field hands, their bodies aching and their spirits simmering, whispered amongst themselves. If the mistress, and by mistress they meant Delphine, the woman who now wore silk, could defy the master, could wear fine clothes, then perhaps the driver's whips could also break. It was a dangerous thought, a spark of rebellion in a powder keg. On the first Friday of the grinding season, a trash fire, seemingly accidental, erupted in the mill yard. It roared out of control with terrifying speed, consuming 3 precious acres of cut cane, turning the season's hard work into ash and smoke. Labarre, his nerves already frayed by the legal battle and social ostracization, immediately suspected sabotage. His response was swift and brutal. He ordered every 10th worker in the suspected gang to be whipped, a chilling display of collective punishment designed to terrorize and control. The very next night, another blow. His finest mule, a powerful, invaluable animal, was found dead, its throat cleanly slit. Fear, already a constant companion on the plantation, curdled into a potent, dangerous rage within Labarre. He doubled the patrols, armed men riding through the quarters, their eyes sharp with suspicion. He imposed a strict curfew, extinguishing the last vestiges of freedom the enslaved people might have found in the cover of darkness. And in a twisted act of protection, or perhaps just another assertion of control, he locked Delphine inside the big house, under the flimsy pretense of safeguarding his bride. She was no longer just his cook, or his wife in name only. She was now both prisoner and pawn, trapped in a dangerous game she had never chosen to play. November 3rd, 1854. A norther, sharp and biting, blew in from the north, rattling the shutters of the big house like dice in a cup. Inside the opulent library, a room filled with leather-bound volumes and the scent of old money, Jean-Pierre Labarre sat hunched over his ledgers. His face was grim, etched with the strain of a season gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. He was calculating the cost of his ruin. The original bet, a staggering $10,000 in gold, was already lost. 5,000 more had vanished with the cancelled cane sales, a direct consequence of his social disgrace. Another 8,000 in repairs and lost production from the accidental fires and sabotage. But the financial bleeding didn't stop there. The New Orleans factor, the powerful merchant who financed his operations, had coldly refused to extend any further credit. And the bank in Baton Rouge had called in his notes, demanding immediate repayment of his considerable debts. He was a man drowning in a sea of red ink. He knew he could survive one lean season, perhaps even two, but this confluence of disasters would break him utterly. At the stroke of midnight, a lonely, desolate hour, he poured himself a brandy. It was the same crystal glass, the same amber liquid, from the very night he'd made that reckless wager. He stared into the flickering flames of the fireplace, perhaps seeing not just the fire, but the inferno he had ignited. Maybe, just maybe, his father's old warning echoed in his mind. Never gamble what you cannot afford to lose. Then, footsteps. Soft, measured, yet undeniably familiar, sounded in the hall. Delphine entered, a spectral figure still in the gray silk dress, now stained with the telltale cane soot of the harvest. She carried a silver bowl, setting it gently before him. Gumbo, its rich aroma curling upwards like incense. "Eat," she said, her voice quiet, almost neutral. It was the first word she had volunteered, offered freely, since the forced ceremony. He ate. The stew, usually a source of comfort, tasted faintly bitter, a subtle, unsettling flavor. But exhaustion, both physical and mental, dulled his suspicion, clouding his judgment. Within minutes, a searing pain ripped through his gut, doubling him over. Agonizing cramps seized him, and he vomited violently onto the plush Persian rug, his blood staining the ornate patterns. Delphine watched, her eyes unblinking, her face a mask of serene detachment. As he writhed, she stepped back, calmly wiping her hands on a dish towel, as if scrubbing a kettle clean. The poison was cassava root, grated fine. A deadly knowledge inherited from the Caribbean cooks who had raised her. It was a potent, insidious toxin, enough to cripple a man, to bring him to the brink of death, but not to kill him outright. Because a dead master, she knew, brings investigators, brings suspicion, brings swift, brutal retribution. But a sick master, incapacitated and vulnerable, brings opportunities. And Delphine, the silent queen who stirred, was about to seize hers. While Labarre lay retching, his empire crumbling around him in a haze of pain and delirium, Delphine moved with a quiet, purposeful resolve. From his belt, she unhooked the iron key, a symbol of his dominion, now hers. She walked to the heavy, imposing safe, its polished wood reflecting the flickering lamplight, and with a soft click, it opened. From its depths, she removed two crucial items: the ink-stained marriage certificate, the very document that had ignited this powder keg, and the deed that listed her, in cold, dehumanizing terms, as Negro woman Delphine, age 26, cook, value $1,200. It was a stark, brutal summary of her existence in their eyes. She carried these two pieces of paper, these twin symbols of her bondage and her forced union, to the hearth. The fire, which had just moments ago been the object of Labarre's despairing gaze, now became an instrument of her liberation. She held the property deed, the document that reduced her to a mere commodity, to the flame. She watched, without a flicker of emotion, as the paper curled and blackened, transforming from a legal instrument of oppression into a fragile, dying butterfly. But the marriage certificate, that she folded meticulously, carefully, and slid into her bodice, tucking it close to her skin. Proof, not ashes, might yet serve her purpose. She understood that some documents, even flawed ones, held a power that could be wielded. Then, she walked out the front door. Not through the back, not through the kitchen entrance, but through the grand, imposing front door. The first time she had ever used it without being ordered, without permission. It was a small act, but profoundly symbolic, a reclaiming of space and agency. Outside, 2 field hands waited silently with a mule cart, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and hope. This wasn't a spontaneous escape. It was a coordinated act, a testament to the quiet network of resistance that had been simmering beneath the surface of the plantation. They drove her 6 miles through the pre-dawn darkness to the secluded cabin of Baptiste Rousseau, the free lawyer of color. By dawn, as the first light touched the horizon, Delphine had signed a deposition, asserting her freedom on grounds of unlawful bondage. The legal battle was no longer merely about her status as property versus wife. It was about ownership of everything Labarre had, because a wife, even a black wife in 1854, in a state that afforded women unique property rights, could claim dower rights, a portion of her deceased husband's estate, if her marriage could somehow be forced into recognition. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but Delphine, having paid the ultimate price herself, was ready to play for everything. News of Delphine's audacious flight spread like wildfire, even faster than the poison that still coursed through Labarre's veins. Labarre, half recovered but wild with a toxic blend of fury and humiliation, rode into town, demanding the sheriff arrest my runaway. But the sheriff hesitated. The marriage certificate, now officially filed and publicly acknowledged, complicated the word runaway. It was no longer a simple case of a master reclaiming his property. It was a legal quagmire, a public scandal that threatened to expose the fragility of their entire system. Sensing this hesitation, sensing the law wavering, Labarre did what gentlemen of his era did when their honor was questioned and legal recourse seemed insufficient. He challenged Augustin Ducens to a duel. In his rage, he blamed the neighboring planter for orchestrating the lawsuit, for daring to question his authority and his perverse marriage. At sunrise the next day, the levee, usually a place of commerce and labor, became a stage for a grotesque tableau. 2 white planters, their silk waistcoats stark against the pale morning light, stood facing each other. Their seconds, grim-faced, held mahogany cases containing the instruments of their deadly ritual. A crowd of laborers, both enslaved and free, held back by drivers, watched in a tense, silent semicircle. The weapons were single-shot pistols, the distance a mere 10 paces. The bet that had started everything had been about pride, about Labarre's unchecked arrogance. This duel, however, would finish it, a bloody, violent culmination of a society's unraveling. They fired. The crack of the pistols echoed across the silent river. Ducens' ball struck Labarre's shoulder, a painful but not immediately fatal wound. But Labarre's shot, fueled by a lifetime of unchecked rage, found its mark. It hit Ducens squarely through the throat. The planter crimsoned the levee mud, gasping like a landed fish, his lifeblood spilling onto the soil he had so fiercely defended. As he died, witnesses swore they heard him laugh, a wet, gurgling sound, and whisper, his last breath a chilling prophecy. She was property, and property will bury you. Murder on the riverfront, a public spectacle of such violence and dishonor, could not be hushed up, not even in this cloistered society. The same parish judge who had stalled and prevaricated, now, faced with undeniable death, issued warrants. Labarre, wounded but still alive, fled back to the perceived sanctuary of his big house. He barricaded himself inside, a king in a collapsing castle, his once unquestionable authority reduced to a desperate, lonely siege. For 3 days, the once bustling plantation yard lay eerily silent. No one entered, save for the undertaker, a grim reaper collecting the dead from the recent duel. Fieldwork stopped entirely. The cane, ripe for cutting, stood untouched, its sweet juice fermenting in the stalks, a potent symbol of the decay that had overtaken Labarre's empire. On the 4th night, a different kind of movement stirred. A crowd of enslaved workers, hundreds of them, quietly approached the big house. They did not burn, they did not loot. They simply stood on the lawn, hundreds of silent silhouettes under the indifferent starlight, waiting. Some whispered that they wanted to see the master's fear, to witness the downfall of their oppressor. Others, with a deeper, more dangerous hope, whispered that they waited for Delphine to return, to lead them, to ignite a true rebellion. Inside, Labar, alone and facing utter ruin, penned a will. In a final desperate act of defiance, a legal torpedo aimed squarely at the white society that had abandoned him, he left his entire estate to my lawful wife Delphine. It was a last, bitter twist of the knife, forcing them to confront the very contradiction he had created. Then he climbed to the attic, a dusty, forgotten space above the grandeur. He tied a rope to a sturdy roof beam, the same beam once used to hang cured hams, its rough wood now destined for a far more tragic purpose. He stepped into the air. When the sheriff, finally breaking down the barricaded doors at dawn, found him, Labar's body turned slowly, his coattails fluttering like broken wings, a silent, macabre testament to the ultimate price of his hubris. The probate court, usually a staid and predictable institution, faced an impossible stack of contradictions. It was a legal quagmire of epic proportions. How could a slave inherit when the law explicitly stated they were property, not persons? Yet how could a wife not inherit when Louisiana's civil law granted women significant property rights, including dower rights, a widow's portion of her husband's estate? The marriage was legally invalid, yet it had been duly filed, a public record that couldn't simply be wished away. A man could own property, yes, but could he be, in a twisted sense, murdered by the very system he upheld, a system that imploded under the weight of his own actions? The scandal was so immense, so unprecedented, that newspapers as far away as Charleston reprinted the story, screaming headlines proclaiming, "Southern honor turned to horror." Creditors, like a flock of buzzards, descended upon the Labar estate. The sugar mill, once a symbol of his power, was sold for half its worth, its machinery silenced, its steam-white promise gone. The vast lands were parceled off, piece by piece, to cover the mountain of debts. But the marriage certificate, that singular, defiant piece of paper, survived. Folded carefully, it remained tucked away in Baptiste Rousseau's files. Using this document, Delphine, with Rousseau's astute legal guidance, filed for her widow's portion, a third of the remaining estate, a bold move that once again forced the legal system to confront its own hypocrisy. The judge, caught between the rigid statutes of slavery and the inescapable scandal, ruled narrowly. Delphine was indeed declared free, a monumental victory in itself. But the marriage, he decreed, conferred no monetary rights because the union offended public morals. It was a judgment steeped in the prevailing racial prejudices and the desperate need to maintain the social order. She walked out of court with nothing but her manumission paper, the document proclaiming her freedom, and the gray silk dress, now grayer with the dust of the river road. Yet freedom was not empty. With nothing but her talent and her indomitable spirit, Delphine opened a cook shop in New Orleans' vibrant French Quarter. She served gumbo, a dish that, patrons swore, tasted of victory, a taste of resilience and quiet triumph. Some nights, to her most trusted regulars, she would recount the story of a man who gambled away a woman, and in doing so, lost absolutely everything. She never named him. She didn't need to. The story, like her gumbo, had a flavor all its own, a bitter truth mixed with the sweet taste of survival. Years later, the drums of war had finally reached Louisiana. Union troops occupied the city, their blue uniforms a stark contrast to the faded Confederate gray. In 1863, a detachment needed headquarters and requisitioned the abandoned Labar townhouse, its grandeur now dusty and forlorn. Soldiers exploring the silent, empty rooms found the attic beam still scarred by rope fibers, a grim testament to the plantation owner's final, desperate act. One lieutenant, a thoughtful diarist from Ohio, recorded a chilling observation in his journal. The South hangs itself by its own laws. It was a profound insight, capturing the self-destructive nature of a society built on human bondage. Delphine, the woman who had stirred gumbo and sparked a revolution, lived into her 70s. She became a respected restaurateur, a quiet force in the French Quarter, and a silent benefactor, discreetly funding schools for freedmen, investing in the future she had fought so hard to secure. When, in her later years, someone dared to ask if she had ever loved the planter, her reply was steeped in a wisdom forged in fire. "Love is a fire. He lit it to burn me, but the wind changed." The gray silk dress, patched now with indigo, a testament to its long life and her journey, hangs today in the Backstreet Museum of New Orleans. It's labeled simply, "Wedding Dress, 1854. No names, no grand pronouncements, just the fabric that outlived the man who once thought people could be owned, a silent witness to a story that refused to be erased. If this riverbed tale, steeped in the bitter truths of history, has shocked you, if it's made you think, then please, drop a comment below. Tell me what state or country you're watching from. I genuinely read every single one, and I'll reply with another historical scandal, another untold story from your neck of the woods. And hey, if you're hungry for more stories the textbooks left out, the ones that challenge our comfortable narratives, then hit that subscribe button and ring that bell. You won't want to miss the next dark, compelling chapter. Jean-Pierre Labarre, in his boundless arrogance, truly believed that slavery granted him absolute power, the power to buy, to sell, even to marry another human being on a simple dare. But instead, his reckless bet, his ultimate gamble, exposed the brittle, horrifying lie at the very heart of the system, the delusional belief that you can chain a people and still keep the world, and indeed humanity itself, from tilting. Delphine's quiet courage, the community's subtle, simmering rebellion, and one singular sheet of paper filed in a backwater courthouse did what no single act, no grand pronouncement had done before. They forced the South to confront the rot, the moral decay, festering beneath its polished floors and grand facades. The plantation owner, a man who had everything, lost his fortune, his standing, and finally, his very life. The woman he had tried so desperately to own, the woman he had reduced to property, walked free, carrying with her the undeniable proof that even in a world built on bondage, human dignity can still ignite a reckoning. The ledger burned, the rope frayed, the cane rotted, but the story, like the mighty river itself, keeps rolling, reminding us that arrogance stakes nothing lasting, while justice, though often painfully slow, collects its debts with compound interest.